A brisket recipe so easy that you can make it in your sleep. Now I mentioned that we're going to be cooking a Wagyu brisket today. We have a Snake River Farms Black. This is 20.6 pounds, so it's a pretty big boy. We were actually going to use this for a competition, but weren't able to end up going, so we're going to feed this to the family this weekend. Make sure to have some paper towels nearby. There's a decent amount of liquids inside of this that you don't want going everywhere. This is a pretty big brisket, so the wife will help me real fast as well. Thank you. Okay, so now we're just going to go ahead and trim this brisket up. You guys have seen me trim briskets enough, I believe, to where I'm not going to fully go through all of my process, but you guys will see a little bit of the in-between and, of course, the end. Now, if you guys have questions about the trim, you can obviously ask them in the comments, and if you feel like you want to see an updated trim, of course let me know. If enough people ask for it, we can definitely do it. I'm just going to take the fat cap on the back side to about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to make sure that everything is nice and aerodynamic. So like right here, for example, I can feel that this is some really hard fat. I'm okay with going after it, but again, this is a backyard brisket, not a competition brisket, so I don't need to be too particular. And just in case anyone's interested, this is a 6-inch boning knife. This is a Victorinox brand. I'll put a link in the description. And the reason I start on the back side here is because this is going to be my presentation side. This is going to be the top side for me. I do cook briskets fat side up whenever I'm cooking them in the backyard. If I was doing a competition brisket, yes, I'm going to cook meat side up. But again, this is not a competition brisket. We're not injecting. This is just going to be a good backyard eating brisket for the family. Here I'm just cleaning everything up, getting these edges off of this brisket, and I want to expose some fresher meat. A lot of the times you'll see that there's a little bit of gray on the outside, which is no big deal. That actually comes from when they're packaging the brisket. I've talked to one of my buddies that actually works at one of these factories, and he says when they're actually putting the plastic around the brisket, the heat or the water that they use to actually suction everything up will give it that gray look on the outside. So we're just exposing that nice red meat here. We will trim some of this decal fat out because that is a large chunk of fat. Now that we're actually trimming this up, I'm not mad at all that I have to use this for the backyard because I don't like the point on this like at all. So you might be able to see over here on this side, that point's actually really small. I like to cook burnt ends, and I don't think this would make for a good competition brisket. So happy to be able to cook it for the family and for you guys on the channel today. We'll round it off over here where it's a little bit thinner. If you look at the flat, you can see there's some nice marbling there. That's going to be the advantage of cooking this snake this weekend. It should have lots of flavor. And once I'm done trimming, I'm typically still going to take my shears and just round the brisket out. This is completely unnecessary. This is just something that I do prefer to do. I do like to try and make good looking briskets every single opportunity I can. So what this allows me to do is just round out these edges around the brisket to where I hopefully don't get any crispy parts, and every single bite of this brisket is really good. And that's all there is to it on our backyard brisket trim. Now let's move on to the next step. We're going to go ahead and season this brisket up now. We want to add a good amount of salt, so we're going to start with a layer of that base. We're starting on the meat side because do not forget that this is going to be the bottom side of our brisket. Make sure to get the sides. Don't be afraid to salt this bad boy up. Next up, we're going to go with a layer of our newest seasoning trifecta. I'm going to go a little bit lighter on this one, but I do want that nice, beautiful barbecue flavor. It's going to give it a little bit of color. Obviously, by the end of it, this is going to be pretty black, but it's all good. Make sure to hit the sides. Last but not least, 16 mesh black pepper. Pretty good coat. We're going to go ahead and flip it over and do the same exact thing to the top side. First up, that base, good nice layer. Next up, trifecta. Last but not least, 16 mesh black pepper. And on this top side, we're gonna go a little bit heavier than we did on the bottom. Again, this is a very big piece of meat. Do not be afraid to season this. And this is actually pretty random, but you guys should follow Pinkerton's Barbecue on social media. So Grant Pinkerton, the owner of Pinkerton's Barbecue, I think he might be doing it on his personal page, but he puts so many great tips out there for people that are trying to get into barbecue when it comes to beef ribs, when it comes to brisket. And if you haven't eaten at his restaurant, it's just out of this world incredible. So definitely give them a follow. Like I said, this just randomly came to my mind because I recently saw a tip of his where it's like, make sure to season your briskets. One of the things that people complain about in general is that a brisket isn't seasoned enough. So make sure you're seasoning your brisket enough with salt, with pepper. Obviously, we added a little more flavor today, but do not be afraid to season this meat. All right, now we're outside at our Weber Searwood XL, and the only thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start smoke boost so we can get some extra smoke flavor while we're smoking our brisket. Now, we call this method the Frio Method around here, and that's because one time when we were at the Frio River, all of my friends and everybody wanted to have cocktails all night, but we wanted briskets the next day. So we had to find a way to get these briskets cooked without staying up all night. So we ended up using my buddy's pellet grill. We did them overnight and they turned out absolutely incredible. So we call this the Frio Method, and I'll tell you a little bit what it's about. So we're gonna start this brisket really low and really slow at 180 degrees with our smoke boost on until the morning. We don't necessarily need to wake up at any specific time, but when we do wake up, we're gonna spritz the brisket, we're gonna bump the temperatures up until it's completely done. Now, because this is a pellet grill and we're not gonna get dirty smoke throughout this cook, you actually don't have to wrap it at all, which is typically what we do not do. We don't end up wrapping this and it turns out really good. It has great bark on it and the brisket just turns out absolutely killer. I wanna show you a few things inside the pellet grill that I like to do when we're doing the Frio Method, especially if you're only doing one brisket. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna throw a water pan on our Searwood XL. So this is about 3/4 of the way full, and you might be asking why I'm throwing this on the pellet grill, and it's because we're only throwing one brisket on here today, and I want there to be enough moisture in my cooking chamber while this is going overnight. So here in a few hours, we're not gonna look at this for at least 8 to 10 hours before we wake up tomorrow, and we do not want to ruin this brisket. We want to make sure that it's nice and tender and everything turns out really good. So this is going to help me control the moisture within my cooking chamber, and it's going to guarantee that I have a really good brisket tomorrow. Now we're going to go ahead and throw the brisket on the Searwood XL, and we're just going to let this thing ride until tomorrow morning. So we will periodically check this. We're not just going to close it and not look at it, but we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Now it's currently 5:30 on our brisket cook, and we have a long ways until we're gonna eat this tomorrow. So we will check this in around 4 hours or so. At that point, if we need to spritz, we absolutely can. We put that water pan in there to help with the moisture retention. So do not forget that you might not need to spritz as often as you might think, especially in the pellet grill with this setup. It's been right at 4 hours on our Frio Method brisket, and you can see that we're getting a little bit of color here. Everything is looking really nice. Everything's extremely soft still, and this has a long way to go. So we're about to head in for the night, and we're not gonna do anything else to this brisket for the rest of the night until tomorrow morning. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit the edges with some avocado spray here, and we'll just go ahead and hit the top as well. I actually just ran out of the spray. You can see nothing else is coming out. So that was about the perfect amount. I just want to make sure to hit the edges so we don't get anything too crispy or anything like that. If I need to, I have some more spray inside, but this is just going to turn out absolutely fine. So we're going to close this up. We're going to actually bump it up to 200 degrees now. So we had it on the smoke boost setting for 4 hours. Now we'll bump it up to 200 degrees so we can start cooking this thing. We don't want to cook it too slow, but I did want to get that extra smoke here in the beginning. Now would also be a perfect time just to make sure your pellets are all the way full in your hopper. I'm not missing many, but I'm still just gonna go ahead and fill it up. It's 7:30 a.m. the next day, so it's already been 14 hours on this brisket. Let's go ahead and take a look at it together and see if there's anything that we need to do. But now it's time to bump up the temperatures, and we want to get this brisket cooked so we can have it for lunch today. Now, if you guys take a look at this brisket, you can see it's definitely gaining some color and getting some bark, and it has shrunk up just a little bit. If you take a look at our water over there, we have lost a little bit, but we've had plenty of moisture in our cooking chamber all night. Everything looks still nice and moist. I don't have any burnt edges or anything like that, which is exactly what I'm wanting, and that's exactly why I like to add that water pan, just for that extra moisture. So just so I can show everybody at home what temp we're running at right now, and you can see we're around 165, 166, 167 degrees, which is perfectly fine. Like I told you guys yesterday, I'm really not worried about temps in a lot of these situations, or if I didn't tell you yesterday, I'll tell you now, I'm really not worried about temps in a lot of these situations. I'm looking for color, I'm looking for doneness on this, right? So I can most definitely tell that although we have a great color on this brisket, this fat needs to be a lot more squishy. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when it comes time to wrap if we decide to do so. So all I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna bump up to 275 degrees, and we're gonna let this brisket continue to ride. At this point, this is the perfect time to start putting an internal probe into your brisket. That way you can monitor the temperature and just see when you think it might be time to wrap. So I talk about it all the time. Temperature is a great guideline, but it is not a tell-all for telling me if this brisket is done or if it's time to wrap. But I know that if we're around 175, 180 degrees, I can start looking at it, I can start checking for fat render, and that might be the perfect time to wrap my brisket. So with the Searwood, it's extremely simple. I'm just gonna plug this into port 1. I'm gonna open up my Searwood. I'm just gonna run it through, and what I like to do is probe right in the middle of the two muscles. So now if you come back, you can see that our leave-in thermometer is at 167 degrees, which is actually really accurate from what we just saw a second ago on our thermopin. Also, now's a perfect time to fill up your hopper. Because we've been going overnight, you're probably a little bit low. Just fill it up just to make sure that you don't run out of any during our cook. It's been about 2.5 hours since we last saw you guys. Let's go ahead and take a look at the brisket. I want to see if it's ready to wrap. We actually decided that we're not going to wrap it today, but I do want to show you guys a perfect point when it is time to wrap. Whew, and the brisket is looking outrageous. There's a little bit of pooling here. Not too worried about that. It is what it is. But one of the things that I'm looking for when it's time to wrap is the fat on the brisket. Is it nice and is it squishy? Okay, so hopefully, can you see right here? Can you see how squishy that is? It absolutely feels like I can break it with my finger. I really don't want to, if I'm being 100% honest, but we'll try and do it for the video real quick. So I should be able to just break that fat. Yep, so you see how it breaks open really, really nice and easy, and you can see that fat under there. It's actually nice and yellow. That hurts my fingers, I'm sorry. But yeah, I mean, yep, yeah, you see how easily we're breaking that fat here? Everything is nice and squishy, and this would be a really good point for me to wrap this brisket. So when you're actually cooking brisket, what you're doing is pushing water out of the brisket. And whenever that fat is nice and rendered and it's really squishy, that's told me that the brisket is done pushing moisture out, and you can wrap it up in foil or butcher paper without risking losing that bark that you used so much time to create. And that's really what you don't want to do. You don't want it to wash off in the wrap. If you guys have ever had that happen, you probably just wrapped a little bit too early. We decided to just let it smoke raw the whole way, but if you guys wanted to wrap, now would be the perfect time. Make sure to look for that fat render, see if you could poke it and break it with your finger pretty easily, and that'll be a good time. It's been about 18.5 hours on this brisket, and don't forget we're showing you guys the Frio method today. We started at 180 degrees yesterday around 5:30, and then we bumped it up to 200 right before we went to bed. This morning we bumped it up to 275. As soon as we woke up, we needed to get this brisket rendered and we needed to get it done. Let's go ahead and double check. It's showing about 207 degrees in the flat, but I want to double check with my thermopin to make sure everything is cooked right. All right, brisket is looking absolutely outrageous if you ask me. Just a beautiful color. You can see everything is nice and jiggly. Take a look at that right there. I have a really good feeling that this bad boy is completely done, but let's go ahead and actually what we'll do is we'll take this out and we'll actually use our thermopin, and we're just gonna look at the back side of it. I don't care about a number. Yeah, you see how easily that goes in? If I pull it out, it doesn't pull the brisket up with it. That makes me know that this is nice and cooked. We'll go ahead and probe on the point side as well, and yeah, you can see that just goes in like butter. Now we'll go ahead and probe the flat. Oh yeah, and you can see again, absolutely zero resistance there. So now I'll show you guys that the internal reading is around 207, 208 degrees. Over here in the flat, it's around 211, 212. And over here in the point, around 210, 211. Now you guys might be thinking that's a high internal temperature, but do not forget this was a Snake River Farms brisket, has a lot of intramuscular fat, so you definitely want to make sure to render all of that fat. This is something that we cook in competition all the time. We'll take it up to 215 degrees. If it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. So that's why I always say temperature is a guideline. It is not the tell-all. Make sure it feels like butter, or make sure that there's zero resistance in that brisket, and that's truly gonna tell you if it's done or not. So we're gonna go ahead and take this off. We're gonna rest it on the counter while it stops cooking, and then we'll wrap it in foil. We gotta take it over to Mom and Dad's. We're eating some lunch today. We're at Mom and Dad's now, and we're about to see how we did on this brisket. Do not forget, we got the Frio Method going. Brisket feels nice and jiggly. Oh yeah, it slices like absolute butter. This is the side that I would get burnt ends out of if I was cooking burnt ends, but today, of course, I'm not. Now, of course, this is a piece right out of the point, so it's super well marbled. You can see that everything is nice and rendered, and it's just got a lot of fat running through this. So it looks extremely amazing. We're gonna take one slice out of the flat here. We got a piece of the flat here. Look at the moisture. Everything looks really nice, holds up under its own weight, and it passes the bend test. Of course, just a little bite. And that brisket's out of this world. Such good flavor comes from that base trifecta, the black pepper, everything just cooked on point. You can make great brisket on a pellet grill, and you can do it without worrying about all the stuff that you would have to on an offset, on a drum, on a Weber Smoky Mountain. Even though those are easy, this is even easier. As always, we really appreciate you guys tuning into this video. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one. It's hot, I'm sweating, I'm uncomfortable. Y'all gotta go.